The operating room fell silent when the surgeon lifted his eyes and realized the woman dying on the table was his wife. Moments earlier, he had chosen to save another woman's child. What he didn't know was that the choice would bury his marriage, his conscience, and the life he thought he controlled. Please make sure you subscribe now, and add to the comments section that you have subscribed as we continue. The hospital never truly slept. Even at midnight, the corridors of St. Matthew's teaching hospital hummed with quiet panic. Machines beeping, hurried footsteps echoing, whispered prayers clinging to the air like unseen ghosts. Dr. Tund Adewale stood alone at the end of the hallway, loosening his surgical mask. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion. 12 hours inside operating rooms had drained not just his body, but something deeper, something he had stopped naming long ago. He checked his watch. 1:17 a.m. Home would be quiet now. His wife would be asleep, probably curled to the edge of the bed, leaving space where he should have been hours ago. She never complained anymore. That silence hurt more than arguments ever did. He reached into his coat pocket for his phone. Then it vibrated in his hand. One name flashed across the screen. Amara. His chest tightened instantly. Not Aisha. Not his wife. His secret. For half a second, he considered letting it ring. Then he answered. Tund. Her voice cracked before she could finish the sentence. In the background, he heard panic, breathing too fast, the rustle of movement, a distant cry. Please, the baby. Something is wrong. I'm bleeding. His training kicked in immediately, but guilt followed closely behind. How bad? He asked, already turning toward the exit. I don't know, she sobbed. There's so much blood. I'm scared. The word baby slammed into his chest. Not a theory. Not a secret anymore. A living consequence. I'm coming, he said. Stay where you are. Don't panic. But panic was already eating him alive. He ended the call and ran. Outside, the night air slapped his face as he crossed the hospital compound toward the emergency wing. His coat flapped behind him, white and clean, like a lie. He didn't call his wife. He didn't even think of her. All he could see was a child struggling for life because of a decision he had buried under months of deception. As he pushed through the emergency doors, alarms screamed from somewhere inside. Pregnant woman arriving, heavy bleeding. Tund's heart thundered. I caused this, a voice whispered inside him. But doctors were trained to ignore voices like that. The gurney burst through the doors. Amara lay on it, her face pale, her hands clutching her stomach. Blood stained the sheets beneath her. When she saw Tund, relief flooded her eyes. You came, she whispered. I'm here, he said, forcing calm into his voice. You'll be fine. But when he placed the monitor against her abdomen, his jaw tightened. The baby's heartbeat was faint, dangerously faint. Prep for emergency surgery, he ordered. Now. As nurses rushed around them, Amara grabbed his wrist weakly. Please, she said, tears slipping down her temples. Don't let my baby die. The word might cut deeper than she knew. Tund pulled his hand away gently. I won't, he said, but fate was already setting its trap. The operating room lights came alive with a sharp, unforgiving glow. They were too bright, too clean, too honest. Dr. Tund Adewale stood at the stainless steel sink, scrubbing his hands with mechanical precision. Soap, water, repetition. A ritual he had performed thousands of times. Yet tonight, his hands trembled beneath the stream. Focus, he told himself. This was surgery, not confession, not judgment. Around him, nurses moved swiftly, their voices clipped and professional. The anesthesiologist checked monitors. A surgical tech laid out instruments, scalpels, forceps, clamps, each one gleaming like a silent witness. Behind the glass wall, Amara lay prepped on the table. Her eyes searched for him. When their gazes met, she tried to smile, but fear swallowed it halfway. Tund nodded once, reassuring her the only way he knew how now, with distance. "Doctor," the anesthesiologist said, "we're losing time." "I know," Tund replied. He turned away and pulled on his gloves. This was what he was trained for. Save lives. Make impossible decisions. Never hesitate. And yet, as he stepped toward the operating table, something felt wrong. Like the air itself had thickened. That was when the door opened. Not the quiet slide of routine entry, but a sudden, urgent swing. A nurse stood frozen in the doorway, her face drained of color. "Dr. Adiwale," her voice faltered. There's another emergency." Tund frowned. "I'm scrubbed in." "I know," she whispered. "But, you need to see this." Before he could respond, a second gurney was wheeled in. The room seemed to tilt. The world slowed, then fractured. On the gurney lay a woman he knew more intimately than anyone else. Isha, his wife. Her hair was disheveled, her skin unnaturally pale. An oxygen mask covered her mouth. Blood stained the sheet beneath her. Dark, unmistakable. For a moment Tund didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't exist. His mind rejected the image entirely, as though refusing it could undo reality. "No," he whispered. Someone was talking, he wasn't sure who. "She collapsed at home," a nurse explained softly. "Massive internal bleeding. Neighbors found her unconscious." Tund staggered back a step. His wife, here, now, in this room. "Vitals?" he asked, though his voice barely sounded like his own. "Unstable," another nurse replied. "Blood pressure dropping." Across the room, Amara let out a weak cry. "Tund, what's happening?" He turned. 2 operating tables. 2 women fighting for life. 2 consequences of one man's silence. This wasn't medicine anymore. It was reckoning. The head surgeon on call entered, assessing the scene quickly. "We can't delay," he said. "We need to split cases." He looked at Tund. "You know both patients' histories. Which one do you take?" The question echoed through the room like a verdict. Which one? Not how. Not can we save both. But who? Tund stared at the floor. His mind splintered into memories. Aisha kneeling by the bed every morning, praying quietly. Aisha smiling at baby clothes in shop windows, pretending it didn't hurt. Aisha touching his arm at night, asking nothing, just wanting closeness. Then Amara, young, afraid, carrying a child that carried his blood. A child who had never chosen deception. The machines beeped faster. Time refused to wait. "Dr. Adewale," the surgeon pressed. "We need an answer." Tund lifted his head. His eyes were glassy. His soul felt stripped bare. His throat closed. The room held its breath. "I'll take the obstetric case," he said finally. "The baby." The words landed heavy. Irrevocable. The other surgeon nodded and moved toward Aisha's table. Tund didn't look at his wife again. He couldn't, because if he did, he might shatter. As the surgical drape rose between the 2 tables, Aisha's hand slipped limply to the side, her wedding ring catching the light for just a second. A single, silent accusation. The incision was made. Blood spilled. Commands were shouted. But Tund's hands moved on instinct alone. Every cut felt like betrayal carved into flesh. Across the room, another team worked desperately to save the woman who had trusted him with her life. Between them stood a curtain, thin fabric, thick consequences, and behind it a marriage was bleeding out. Time did not stop, pressed closer. Inside the operating room, seconds stretched like wire pulled too tight. The steady beep of the monitor marked each fragile heartbeat. Slow, irregular, threatening to vanish at any moment. Heart rate dropping, the anesthesiologist announced. Tund didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the incision, but his mind was everywhere else. Blood pooled faster than expected. Clamp, he said sharply. The instrument landed in his hand, cold and familiar. His fingers moved with practiced accuracy, but his chest burned as though he were suffocating. This is my fault. He pushed the thought away. Doctors didn't think. They acted. BP is falling, a nurse added. Increase fluids, Tund ordered. Prepare for transfusion. Across the room, beyond the thin curtain dividing the two operating tables, he could hear raised voices, urgent, strained. Someone shouted for suction. Another voice said, "We're losing her." Tund flinched. He knew that voice. It was Dr. Karim, his closest colleague. And he knew exactly which her they meant. The baby's heartbeat fluttered again, faint but present. "There," Tund muttered. "I can see the source of the bleed." He worked faster now, his movements sharp, aggressive, almost desperate. Every stitch felt like bargaining with fate. Take this. Leave her. But fate did not negotiate. A memory surfaced uninvited. Aisha, standing in their kitchen months ago, holding a pregnancy test with trembling hands. Hope had flickered in her eyes, then died quietly when the result showed a single cruel line. She had smiled anyway. "It's okay," she'd said. "God's time is best." He swallowed hard. God's time is now, he thought bitterly. And he's watching. "Doctor," the anesthesiologist said again, louder. "Baby's heart rate is unstable." "I know," Tund snapped. "I'm almost there." His hands shook. For the first time in his career, fear crept beneath his confidence. Not fear of failure, but fear of what success would cost. He imagined Aisha waking up alone in recovery. Or not waking up at all. He imagined explaining. He imagined her silence. That silence would be worse than screams. Suddenly, the monitor let out a long, warning tone. "Fetal distress," the nurse said. "We're running out of time." Tund made a decision then, not as a husband, not as a sinner, but as a man trying to outrun consequence. "Proceed," he said. The room moved in perfect coordination. A final incision. A rush of blood. A moment suspended between life and loss. Then a cry. Sharp. Loud. Alive. The baby's cry filled the room like an accusation wrapped in miracle. "It's a boy," someone said. Tund exhaled, his shoulders sagging. The baby lived. Against all odds. For one fragile moment, relief washed over him. Then reality came crashing back. Behind the curtain, the voices grew frantic. "BP is crashing. Prepare defibrillator. Doctor, she's coding." Tund's heart slammed against his ribs. "No," he whispered. He stepped back from the table, ripping off his gloves. "I need to." He stopped himself. He knew the rules. He knew the protocol. And worst of all, he knew the truth. He had already chosen. The baby was carried away, wrapped in blue cloth, crying loudly. Strong, undeniable proof of survival. But Tund could not bring himself to look. His eyes were locked on the curtain, on the space where his wife was fighting for breath. The beeping stopped. Then came a sound worse than silence. A flat tone. Long, unforgiving. Someone said softly, "Time of death, 3:42 a.m. The words didn't register at first. Tund stood frozen, his hands dripping red onto the floor. "No," he said again, this time louder. "No, no, no." The curtain was pulled back. Aisha lay still, too still. Her eyes were closed. Her face calm, almost peaceful, as if she had already forgiven him. That was what broke him. Tund collapsed to his knees. The operating room, once a place of control, became a courtroom without walls, and he stood condemned by his own hands. The hospital did not stop moving when Aisha died. That was the cruelest part. Machines continued to hum. Nurses continued to walk briskly down the corridors. Somewhere in the maternity wing, a newborn cried strong, demanding life without apology. But inside operating room 3, time had finally collapsed. Dr. Tund Adewale knelt on the floor long after the monitors had gone silent. Blood dried on his gloves. No one rushed him. No one touched him. Everyone in the room understood something sacred had been broken, and it wasn't protocol. Aisha lay still on the table. Not the dramatic stillness of television death. The quiet, undeniable stillness of absence. Her chest did not rise. Her hands no longer twitched. Her wedding ring rested against lifeless skin, catching the light every time Tund shifted, even though he tried not to look. But he looked anyway. He always did. "Doctor," a nurse said gently, "we need to transfer the body." Body. That word shattered whatever composure he had left. "That's my wife," he whispered hoarsely. The nurse nodded, eyes wet. "I know." Tund stood slowly, as though gravity had doubled. When he reached Aisha's side, his legs nearly gave out again. He touched her face. Cold. Not cool, cold. "Wake up," he whispered. "Aisha, please." No response. He pressed his forehead to her hand and sobbed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the broken restraint of a man who had run out of lies. No one comforted him. There was nothing left to say. An hour later, Tund stood in the corridor outside the operating rooms, still wearing his scrubs. Blood stained the front. He hadn't noticed. Dr. Karim approached quietly. "I'm sorry," he said. Tund nodded, staring at the wall. "She asked for you," Karim added, voice low, "before she lost consciousness." Tund turned sharply. "What?" "She said your name," Karim continued, "over and over." The words landed harder than any accusation. Aisha had been calling him, while he chose, while he cut, while he saved another life. Tund pressed his fist against the wall until his knuckles burned. "I should have been there," he whispered. Karim said nothing. There was no comfort left to offer. The sun was rising when Tund finally left the hospital. Morning light spilled across the city, indifferent and cruel. People hurried to work. Vendors opened their stalls. Life resumed without permission. He drove home in silence. The house greeted him with stillness. Aisha's shoes were still by the door. Her handbag rested on the chair where she always dropped it. A pot of soup sat cold on the stove, half prepared. She had been cooking, waiting. Tund sank into the couch and stayed there for hours. He didn't cry again. Grief had moved beyond tears. The funeral came too quickly. Condolences blurred into noise. People spoke of fate, of God's will, of strength. Tund stood beside the grave in a black suit that felt too heavy for his body. Someone handed him a tissue. Someone squeezed his shoulder. Someone said, "She was a good woman." He nodded. Yes, that was the problem. Amara came 3 days after the burial. She stood in the doorway holding the baby, wrapped carefully, alive and warm. "I didn't know if I should come," she said. Tund stared at the child he had chosen, the child who breathed because Aisha did not. "I know," he replied flatly. Amara stepped inside slowly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted this." Tund finally looked at her. For the first time, there was no desire in his eyes. No affection. Only truth. "Neither did my wife," he said. Amara flinched. Silence stretched between them. Thick with guilt neither could escape. That night, Tund slept alone in the bed he had shared with Aisha for 7 years. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The house felt larger now, hollower, and for the first time since the operating room, he understood something clearly. Saving a life does not erase the cost of betrayal. Some choices cannot be balanced. Some deaths demand everything. Grief does not leave all at once. It settles. It rearranges furniture. It empties rooms. It teaches silence new meanings. Weeks passed after Aisha's burial, but her absence grew louder with every sunrise. Tund returned to work because the hospital demanded it. Patience did not care that his heart was shattered. Scalpels still needed steady hands. Lives still needed saving. And he saved them, day after day. But every life he preserved felt like a reminder of the one he had lost. At night, he returned to the house he and Aisha had built together. Room by room, dream by dream. Her scent still clung to the pillows. Her clothes still hung neatly in the wardrobe, untouched. Tund could not bring himself to move them. Felt like betrayal all over again. Amara returned on a rainy afternoon. She stood under the doorway with the baby pressed against her chest. The child slept peacefully, unaware of the wreckage surrounding his existence. "I need to talk," she said quietly. Tund stepped aside without a word. They sat in the living room, the same room where Aisha once served tea to guests, smiling politely, hiding pain he never bothered to ask about. Amara rocked the baby gently. "I've been thinking," she began, "about us, about what happens now." Tund said nothing. "I know this is hard," she continued, "but maybe we can still be a family. The baby needs a father." That did it. Tund stood abruptly. He turned his back to her, breathing deeply, gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. "A family?" he said slowly. "You think this began with love?" Amara's eyes filled with tears. "Tund." He turned to face her. "No," he said firmly. "We didn't have love. We had secrecy. We had lies. And now we have consequences." She clutched the baby tighter. "I didn't know she would die." "I know," he replied. "But I knew she was alive. And I still chose." The words tasted bitter. "This child lives," he said, voice cracking, "because my wife died." The sentence hung in the air like a curse. Amara sobbed, not loudly, not theatrically, but with the quiet devastation of someone who finally understood the weight of her place in the story. "I can't stay," she whispered. "I see her everywhere." "So do I," Tund replied. That night, Amara packed. There was no argument, no shouting, only silence heavy with regret. At the door, she hesitated. "Do you hate me?" she asked. Tund shook his head. "No, I hate what I became." She nodded, accepting that truth. And then she left, taking the child, the living reminder, the final consequence of his betrayal. The door closed softly behind her. But the echo lasted forever. Days turned into months. Tund became a ghost in his own life. He worked longer hours. He volunteered for the most dangerous surgeries. Some whispered he was punishing himself. They weren't wrong. One evening, he opened Aisha's bedside drawer for the first time. Inside was a small notebook. Her handwriting filled the pages. Prayers, grocery lists, thoughts she had never shared. On the last page, dated 2 days before her death, she had written, "If love is patience, then I have loved enough for two." Tund dropped the notebook and wept openly, for the first time since the operating room. Time moved forward. It always did. Years passed, measured not by calendars but by scars Tund learned to live with. Dr. Tund Adewale became one of the most respected surgeons in the city. His name appeared in medical journals. Young doctors quoted him. Patients traveled long distances just to be operated on by his hands. They called him brilliant. They called him dedicated. They called him selfless. No one called him happy. He lived alone in a smaller apartment now, far from the house he once shared with Aisha. He sold it quietly, unable to breathe within walls that remembered her laughter too well. At night, he sat by the window, listening to the city settle into sleep. And every night, the same thought returned. If I had told the truth sooner. Once a year, without fail, Tund visited the cemetery. He never went on Aisha's birthday. He never went on anniversaries. He went on the day she died. He stood before her grave, hands clasped behind his back, coat buttoned tightly, like a man standing before a judge who never spoke. "I saved hundreds," he whispered once. "But I lost you." The wind answered nothing. That silence was his sentence. Sometimes he wondered about the child. The boy would be in school now. Perhaps he laughed easily. Perhaps he had his eyes. But Tund never searched. Some bridges, once burned, were meant to stay ashes. He sent money anonymously when he could. It was not redemption, just responsibility. Even that felt heavy. One evening, after a long surgery, a young intern asked him a question. "Sir," she said nervously, "how do you live with hard choices?" Tund paused. He thought of 2 operating tables, 2 heartbeats, 1 decision. "You don't," he said finally. "You learn from them." She nodded, not fully understanding. He hoped she never would. On the 10th anniversary of Aisha's death, Tund returned home later than usual. He sat at his desk and opened the old notebook, its pages worn, edges soft from years of handling. He read the last line again. "If love is patience, then I have loved enough for 2." Tund closed the book gently. That night he slept without dreaming. Final moral lesson: betrayal does not always arrive screaming. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it wears the face of love. But every secret demands payment. And when the bill comes due, it takes more than it ever gave. Some choices save lives. Others cost everything. The end.